This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Reliving the life of Mary McLeod Bethune through the eyes of Ersula Knox Odom on this edition of Conversations. Ersula Knox Odom is a talented speaker and author in her own right. But for well over a decade, she has been portraying Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. Perhaps you recognize Dr. Bethune as founder of Bethune-Cookman University, but her accomplishments extend well beyond the university. For example, she was an advisor to President Franklin Roosevelt and a major force in the civil rights movement. To learn more about Dr. Bethune, we are pleased to have Ersula Knox Odom on this edition of Conversations. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What a pleasure to have you. How did you get involved with playing this role, such a historic role?
Well, I wrote a book called At Sula's Feet, and a couple of friends of mine heard me read from that book, and they asked me to apply for the position with the Florida Humanities Council because they had recommended someone before that did not quite live up to what they wanted her to do, and they were trying to save face. Now, at that time, I had no idea how powerful this woman was, and once I started researching, it was like, oh, this is cool. Right. And by the time I actually applied, I was really wanting to do it.
Right. And so you really were not even that aware of her until then?
No. All I knew about was the Battle of the Bands, FAMU, and Bethune-Cookman.
Right.
That was it.
That was it. Now, oddly enough, we were talking off camera, and so you had a background in theater coming up through college, but went into the business world, and so you've kind of come full circle. Tell me that story.
Yes, when I went to college at Eckerd College, I majored in theater and danced in every dance production except one for the full 4 years that I was there. Came out, started looking for a job, and found out that there was no money in it.
That's right.
So I had to do something else, and I ended up working in computers for 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you auditioned, I'm assuming, to get the role, to travel around and do the performance. When you first started doing your research about Dr. Bethune, what was it that most intrigued you?
How much she did.
Really?
How could any one person do as much as she did? It was amazing. It was like 5 different people. Yeah. Starting a school, working with presidents, starting organizations, advocating for rights for her fellow man and fellow woman, you know. It was amazing.
How did she get in that position? Because I read that, so she was one of 17 children?
Yes. She was the first one born after slavery ended. So the first one to be born into freedom.
Right.
And she just made herself useful. That's the story that she tells, that she was always a helpful person. So she got a lot of attention for being who she was. She was special.
She was an educator first and foremost, right?
Yes, and it came out of a desperate moment that I tell about in my performance, where she discovered that she could not read and she wanted to. And that scene, or that event, caused her to really want to learn to read and then share that passion, that desire, that need with other people.
How did she discover give us a little?
Well, she accompanied her mother to the home of a woman that she was once a slave of, her mother was a slave of, to carry a load of wash. And she was playing with the little girls in the yard. And everything was okay as long as she was playing mammy to their dolls. But when she reached for a book, that's when things changed. And the moment got really serious and traumatic for her. One that was not to be forgotten.
How old was she at this point?
6 or 7 years old.
Okay. And how did she go about learning to read at that point? Tell me about the process.
Well, there was a missionary person that came into Maysville, South Carolina, looking to start a school, and she came to the McLeod home, and she was allowed to go learn.
Okay. And I did read a quote about that, how that just completely changed her life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think as you look back on her life? What do you think was the biggest role, her biggest accomplishment?
Well, when she gained access to the White House, then she gained access to influence an entire nation, and in ways that are yet to be discovered. I'm still learning about what all she did. As the director of the youth administration under Roosevelt, that meant that she was able to help decide who would get to learn what kind of skills, in like the pilot program, the student pilot program. That meant that the Tuskegee Airmen actually learned how to fly those airplanes, and she was a part of that decision-making process.
How did she gain access to the White House? How did she become friends with Roosevelt?
Well, when you're as active as she was in all kinds of areas, organizing women, organizing youth, helping with disaster recovery during storms and what have you, your name gets around. And the suffragette movement, getting people out to vote, campaigning for individuals, campaigning against certain people, then you become a person in a position of power, and that's what she was. And if you can help someone get elected, you get attention.
Right, right.
And by being in those positions, she would go to Washington, D.C. She met a lot of people. A lot of people came into Daytona that she would go talk to, and everyone knew who she was. After having started a school, she was in a position of influence in so many different ways.
Right. How did she get to the point of actually starting the school? Like I said, we were talking about before, she was an educator by trade. How did that evolve? I guess give me kind of the biographical sketch of it, if you will.
She eventually went to school, got a degree, came out and started teaching. Was asked to come to Florida by a pastor, Palatka, Florida.
Okay.
And then another pastor asked her to come to Daytona, Florida. And she started the school there. And it grew.
Okay. And of course, pretty big time stuff now.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, she was not only an educator, but I understand also quite the businesswoman too.
Yes. In fact, I live in Tampa, Florida right now. And there was an insurance company there, and when the founding member passed away, she ended up being the president of that organization, and we don't know of another woman in that position during the time that she was head of Central Life Insurance.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's impressive in today's world. I mean, you know, with all the challenges that women have, you know, climbing the corporate ladder and whatnot, but that's like really impressive for that.
Yes.
That time frame. What was the key? What allowed her to get there in that position?
Well, first of all, funding the educational institution took all kinds of creativity.
Yeah.
And that included selling their wares, I mean, things that they grew. They actually put together a group that sang. And then to work for a company like that so that she can gain income. And now the people that she worked with were also her friends. Yeah. I understand that G.D. Rogers and Mary McLeod Bethune were actually very, very good friends. So they were helping each other out in their endeavors. Right. He helped her with her school. She helped him with his company.
Right. Yeah. Now, and I believe she also maybe had some interest or owned a resort as well.
Oh, yeah. She, along with several other business people, bought property on, which is now Bethune Beach, because African Americans at the time could not go to a beach because of segregation. Right. So they bought the land and started selling lots all over the country, and people were buying it. And it exists today. Now, it's not in the same hands, but
wow.
She did it.
That's
along with her partners.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And when you think about all of the challenges that she must have had to deal with back in those days, I can only imagine. What about her character? Talk about her character. I mean, because you've got to be strong. You got to be strong-willed to be able to accomplish what she accomplished in those challenging times.
From what I understand, she was a no-nonsense person with a deceptively soft demeanor when negotiating, but strategically extremely shrewd. Like she responded based on who she was working with, but you couldn't pull one past her. I mean, she would put you in your place, from what I understand, and she was hard-nosed when she needed to be. She was loving, kind, but you didn't cross her.
She was a shrewd businesswoman.
Yes.
Yeah. When you look back across her life and all the things that she's accomplished, what do you have a favorite moment in her life?
Well, the favorite thing that I think of, and I need to find this photograph again, but I have a vision of her standing behind a president as he was signing some bill. And she had her arm draped across on the back of the chair behind him. In the 1940s, a black woman standing behind the president with her arm on his chair, that's a sense of belonging, a sense of power, a sense of forget the rest of the world. This is who she is. She was well positioned to influence decisions. Mm-hmm. And that said that to me.
Yeah. Talk about some of the things that she did influence along the way through working in Washington.
Well, she picked the first women to be in WAC, the Office of Candidates. Mm-hmm. And she was there when they actually got their appointments and graduated, and she had her own suit. No, I shouldn't, excuse me for military people. She had her own uniform. And they called her the general, you know. But what I also realized in looking through the archives, she was almost like a housing authority person too, because I saw where she was approving loans for people to get money to be in their homes, or relief money. So she had some roles like that. She was an official, government official, and the impact was widespread. She negotiated for the right for black people to be in the Red Cross. Went around the country talking about that.
I don't want to put you on the spot on this, but I just thought about this. You ever think about what she would be like if all those skills and all that character, and she were alive in today's world with the opportunities that are available? You ever thought about that?
I do. I have that thought, but I also have another thought.
Okay.
Once I gave my opinion about that in response to the question like that, and a fellow Chautauquan said, "That's your opinion. It is not for you to be giving your opinion." So I am not going to say what Ursula thinks she would be like today, because I don't know. What I'm doing is trying to research who she was and bringing that to light. And I don't want to confuse it with who I am and my opinion about what she would have been.
Fair enough, fair enough. Yeah. You're talking about Chautauquan.
Yes.
Explain to folks what that means.
Well, we research the life of a person, and then we try to capture the essence of that person so that we can bring that person back to life. And we do that in character so that we can suspend reality for a moment and have you think about who that person might have been, to see enough that you will want to go and research more about that person. We cannot talk about something that we don't know. I can't pretend that I know something I don't. Right. So in character, if she would not have known that, I can't have known that. You know, the character cannot say something outside of her lifetime.
Understand, yeah.
And actually that ends up being fun sometimes because people will start talking about Martin Luther King and I'll go, what? Or they'll start talking about a cell phone and it's like, no. Anyway.
So, that is neat. How do you prepare as you get ready? So if you're going to do a show on a particular night, what's your preparation like to do that? Because I don't know. I'm fascinated by people who are able to get into character like that.
Well, I go to a quiet place and just say to myself that I want to be true to her, whatever that is, and keep her spirit alive through the words that I say. And I always go back through and look through the notes again because there's just so much that remembering it all takes a bit of effort. And then when I'm in a different location, sometimes I try to look for something that would be relevant to where I am, because she was all over the place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you memorize a script or is it different each time?
There's a script that is basic, but what I try to do is visualize what she was seeing, what she was saying, and tell the story.
Okay.
It's from a script,
right?
But it's somewhat interactive as well.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to interact with family members of hers?
Yes.
Tell me about who. Well, first of all, who, and second of all,
one of her granddaughters. Well, let me back up. I was in Daytona, and I had 2 performances in Daytona. The first night, someone asked me that question, and I said, no, I have no idea what the family thinks because I've not met any that had seen my performance. The very next night, after my performance, and I was at Bethune-Cookman University, a lady walks up to me and puts her arms around me and says, hello, grandmother. And it was a very positive interaction. She was very pleased with the way that I portrayed her grandmother, because I didn't portray her as an old, weak person, because she grew to be an older person. And
sure.
You know, you become a little bit feeble as you grow
sure.
older, but that wasn't the essence of who she was as a person. So I don't go there. I don't take her to the last days of her life in terms of how she may have been physically, because that's not who you want to know about.
Right.
We all go through that if we're lucky.
Right. So you had a chance to talk with her.
Yes.
Okay. And what did you learn? What did she tell you? Did she have any inside stories?
Well, that particular night, there were 2 people there that that were important to me: the granddaughter and also the curator of the museum. And the curator said that she was fact checking me, and I passed.
Oh, well, that's good.
And then the granddaughter was pleased with the way that I was portraying her. We didn't talk about the actual stories. She didn't challenge anything. She didn't offer any additional ones. She was just responding to what she saw, and that she was happy with that.
It must have been kind of surreal for her. Huh?
Yeah. She expressed that.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Let's talk a little bit about your personal career. You've written a couple of books yourself. Tell me a little bit about those, and I'll begin with At Ersula's Feet.
Well, I have loved old stories, old photographs. In fact, my very first memory is crawling under my grandmother's bed, which was one of those iron beds up high, and pulling out a box that had photographs, letters, stamps, a lock of her sister's hair. It was just a magic box for me. And ironically, it was in a Have a Tampa box.
Have a Tampa,
and I ultimately ended up in Tampa, but at the time I had no idea what a Tampa was. So it was just filled with a bunch of memories. And from that day until this, I have loved old photographs and old stories. And actually in my book, I have photographs that I saved from a fire. If I had not gotten them, they would have burned up in a fire that ultimately happened after that.
And we have another book popped up right here, African Americans of Tampa. Tell me about this.
That came as a result of being contacted by the publisher. They wanted me to write about something else. And I researched that, and I said, there's not enough left to even talk about that, so that's not going to work. And I said, well, let me tell you what I do. And they said, we know what you do. So, oh, okay. Because I was impressed with what they were doing. They had these kinds of books all over the country. And we started brainstorming, and they said, what about African Americans of Tampa? And I said, done. That's what I want to do. So after that, I went through public domain photographs that happened to be at our library. We were very fortunate in that respect that the Burgert brothers took a lot of pictures that are in public domain. And I literally went through 15,000 photographs looking for those that have to do with blacks in Tampa. And if it did not have a caption that I could then write about, or if a story that I could not write about, I didn't include it in the book. So with those photographs, I went from house to house and asked people if they knew anybody on the picture or in the picture, and that's how I pulled it together. There were also some people that shared photographs that were from their own collection, that, and in a couple of cases, were going to be tossed in the garbage. So I preserved a lot of that.
I'm looking through here at Sula's feet, and you were talking about the old photographs and stuff like that. What does an old photograph tell us? What do you get from that? Other than the obvious.
Okay, there is one that tells a story. And I always talk about this because it reminds me to say, listen to what someone is saying to you. They may be giving you your history. My grandmother had 2 sets of twins, and there's a picture of the first set. And how I know which child is which is because grandmother told me that Johnny was the one that would not keep his hand down. So I am able to share with their descendants, that's your daddy, that's your mother, because grandmother told me the story of that one photograph. Because otherwise it would just be 2 babies that you couldn't tell apart.
Right. As you've done your research over the years and dug through various photographs, what's the most interesting one you found?
The most interesting one? Well, it's not an old photograph, but the one that comes to mind is the first time I saw my first cousin and his wife. And she happened to be a little bit older than him, not much, but some. And I took the picture, and the love that I saw in this woman's face from my first cousin, I loved her on the spot.
Interesting.
That was enough. And ultimately, when she passed, that picture ended up as a part of the service because it was a look of love that was just true to the end.
Yeah.
Some 20-some years later.
Yeah. And I guess that was probably the question I was trying to get to when I say, what do you see in a picture when you look back at some older photographs and stuff like that? I enjoy looking back at. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so here's what I realized when I tell about African Americans of Tampa, when I realized that people really liked the book, I had to figure out why. And I remembered that when I was growing up, grandmother had a best friend called Baby Jane. And all I remember about Baby Jane is the silhouette. I couldn't tell you what she looks like to this day for nothing in the world. She was happy-go-lucky. She loved the heck out of me, but I have no idea what she looks like. When I put African Americans of Tampa in front of some people, I was putting Baby Jane in front of them. I was showing them what their mother's or father's best friend looked like, what their great-grandfather really looked like. They had no idea in some cases who these people, what they really looked like until I showed them the pictures. Yeah. And so that in itself was rewarding when I realized how much joy it was bringing to some people.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's really neat to look back on those old photographs and just see how different things were back then. But in many ways, still the same, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now there's one other picture, and I think it's on page 25. Not that one.
Of Tampa?
That the value of it came into reality when my first cousin asked me to take a picture of it. No, it's not 25. Okay, my first cousin asked me to take a picture of him in Tampa, Florida. No, in Savannah, Georgia, of him balancing on a railroad tie or rail. And I asked why. He said, because my granddaddy built this railroad. Well, he had no idea what part of that railroad that his grandfather actually touched, but he claimed the whole thing. So the picture that I'm showing you here is of a construction site that was taken to document a construction site, but it is African American history, because this, all 3 stories down in the ground of this drainage system in Tampa is covered with African American men. That is an African American history story right there.
Interesting. So it really is kind of the old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
In that case, yes.
Yeah. Wow. And what is this on the opposite page? Because we had a shot of the.
Well, Ybor City is known for the eclectic grouping of individuals. You had Cubans, you have Afro-Cubans, you had whites, black, and this picture I love because it shows the mixture of people together, working together.
Working together. Speaking of working, you're going to continue doing the Chautauquan performances. What else do you have on your agenda these days?
Well, right now, one of the biggest things that I'm really enjoying is putting up legacy walls. And what that is that I will capture the story of a school, and we have one going up this month, and the one that's already up. I tell the story of the namesake. I tell the story of the school, and then I highlight some individuals that went to that school as an example of the success and the success story of that school.
Interesting.
The most wonderful thing just happened. We have a wall going up for Edison Elementary School, and I wrote a script that the Straz actually taught to the students to portray the young people that were on the wall. Some of those young people were in the audience.
Wow.
As they saw themselves being portrayed.
Wow.
And that was a great moment for the students and for the young people who are now able to see themselves being honored.
How fascinating. If folks want to learn more about you, you have a website?
Yes, I do.
And it is?
Sulatoo.com, SULATOO.com.
Okay, wonderful. Ersula Knox Odom, thank you so very much. You may see her around performing as Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And of course, she's also an author as well. At Sula's Feet is one of her books, as well as African Americans of Tampa. And as she just mentioned, at Sula's Feet too. TOO.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
By the way, you can see more of our conversations online at WSRE.org/conversations. We're also flying around Facebook and YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take great care of yourself. We'll see you soon.